So next up for our second presentation this afternoon is Jack Sutherland. Jack is a senior system engineer working for Synoptics in Bristol. But however, he's here today representing a team of, I think, 7 individuals from the INCOSE Technical Leadership Institute. And Jack is presenting his paper on the systematic model of leadership approaches. So please welcome Jack.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing? There's definitely a few tired faces around. I think we've hit the day 2 mid-afternoon slump. So I'm going to take a leaf out of Nikki's book of unorthodox icebreakers and ask you all to stand up, if you don't mind, just to re-energise a little bit and maybe have a stretch, have a look at the ceiling. And roll the shoulders, maybe do a little 360 on the spot, and sit back down. Yeah, that'll do. Thank you. Yeah, so as I was introduced, Jack Sutherland. I'm here from Synoptics, a systems engineering consultancy down in Bristol, but actually I'm representing the INCOSE Technical Leadership Institute today, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. Okay, is this thing going to work? It is fantastic. So, hands up if you've seen this before. We've talked about it a lot over the last 2 days. So, a few hands. This is the summary slide of the INCOSE Vision 2035. Preferable, I think, to the 76-page PDF version. I won't go through it in detail because actually I think we've covered a lot of it in the last couple of days. I just want to use it to set the context for what I'm going to talk about for the next 45 minutes. So there's loads and loads on here. We've talked about the sustainability aspect, the fact that that's not new at all, but we're going to be under more and more scrutiny with that. We've got the sustainable design goals. We've got that net zero challenge being written into UK law. There's this whole section on the interdependent world, the fact we've got interconnected, highly coupled systems that require a transdisciplinary approach, and we've talked about that. And with that comes the digital transformation. There's also a lot in here around Industry 4.0 and the fact that we're transitioning to kind of cyber physical systems. There's a piece about Society 5.0, this vision of a human-centered society and leveraging technology in an increasingly human-centered world. It's a whole different mindset, and I think that's been one of the common themes I've picked up on in the last day and a half. We've had this mechanistic, product-centric approach that has got us to where we are today, but fundamentally, yesterday's technologies, those development strategies aren't going to get us to there. So something's got to change. One aspect that the INCOSE Vision doesn't touch a huge amount on is the increasing shortage of engineers globally. And I'm really pleased Hazel and Alexander mentioned it, because in the UK alone, we're 173,000 short across STEM, but around 60,000 of that is in engineering roles. And no matter how hard we try, and we absolutely have to try, but we're not going to bridge that gap with people numbers or a focus on individual squat. So what are we going to do? We need to be a bit smarter. I think we need to kind of embrace the opportunities, the theme of the last 2 days, but also the increasing complexity and expectations, and apply systems thinking to challenge those individuals, I guess, that suggest that technology complexity has already surpassed the human capacity to manage it. And that's a genuine fear, it seems, particularly with advancements in AI, and although we're not quite at the point of a sort of Terminator-type scenario, the fact remains is that we cannot control complexity. We cannot control complexity, but we can control our response. And that's the bit I'm going to keep coming back to. So whether or not you agree with the INCOSE Vision, actually, it doesn't really matter. As technical leaders, as a community, we need to influence that response in a positive manner, and move away from the kind of negative unintended consequences that could otherwise Okay, so that's the problem context. So I went on a little bit there, and we, as a team of 5 individuals, believe it or not, from cohort 7 of the INCOSE TLI, we thought we'd attempt to develop a model of leadership approaches necessary to try and help enable the realisation of this vision. So the INCOSE TLI, for those that don't know, which is maybe most of this room actually, the TLI is a global network of active INCOSE members seeking to improve their leadership skills. It's an open, collaborative environment, and the programme is about 2 years long. It's aimed at kind of mid-ish career professionals that have been around for a little while, but maybe looking to make that next step, that transition to technical leadership to management. The course is designed around increasing self-awareness, improving understanding of complexity, and providing experience in leading through influence in the presence of uncertainty and ambiguity. My fellow cohort 7 members, as you've probably noticed, are not here. Despite the fact there's 4 chairs that would have been perfect for them, they are here in spirit only. So apologies, I'm 20% of the team. I will just mention them because this was a joint effort. So Carell, she's a modelling and simulation engineer who works for the Aerospace Corporation in LA. Alexandra's a professor of SC working as a naval control systems SME for the US DoD. Shramana is based in Bangalore in India. He works for Skytran and is developing a really cool magnetic levitation transport system. And Bangani is the president of the INCOSE South Africa chapter. So, and his technical expertise is more in electronics, really. But it's truly a global, diverse, international, intercontinental team, and that really helped with what we were trying to achieve here, because it was bringing together lots of different cultures and diverse experience. So this is the loose structure of the technical paper. It is condensed to 6 pages due to strict conference rules, and that makes sense. But if anyone wants the full fat version, just see me afterwards. So I'm going to aim to run through each of these 4 sections as quickly as I can. I'll leave some time at the end for further dialogue and discussion. So, literature review. Before we sort of propel forward 10 or 15 years, we actually started by having a look over our shoulders and read through the previous INCOSE visions. So there was a Vision 2025, created in 2014, and there was a Vision 2020, created back in 2007. And it's interesting that all of the challenges that those visions identified are, for organisations involved in systems, they still exist today. It talks about mission complexity, growing faster and faster, and how we manage that. It talks about systems design emergence from pieces rather than architecture, and we are getting better at that, but there are still too many systems that are brittle and difficult to test and are expensive to operate. It talks about lost knowledge and investment between life cycle phase boundaries, but also between projects and systems. And it talks about technical and programmatic sides being poorly coupled, basically. So despite the fact that program managers and systems engineers quite often have the same objective, it's about delivering value to the customer via the system of interest. We, SE, focus on technical performance measures, and program management will always prioritize schedule and budget. So why does that still happen is the question we're asking ourselves. And what can we do individually as systems engineers and technical leaders to drive the necessary changes? Well, one of our colleagues across the pond, Gary Strong, who is a former engineering manager at GE Healthcare, he believes that part of the answer stems from systems thinking. And again, this is something that's been talked about for the last day and a half, which is great, kind of validates what we've been researching. And he argues that, yes, the increasing rate at which technology development is progressing has now surpassed the capability of humanity to adapt to its usage. That is true that is true only assuming the use of traditional engineering methods and approaches. And I think that's a key point, because systems thinking narrows this gap. He argues quite well in his paper how it brings clarity to ambiguity, to chaos, and then how that would otherwise just kind of reign supreme. So what makes a professional systems thinker? Influential, yep. Respected servant leaders, yep. Having an impact, having a significant impact on the product and on the organisation. Serve to lead is this motto that came up quite a lot in our research. It's something that I understand took precedence in the military world after the Second World War. And today it still underpins a lot of the academic and practical leadership training that is taught at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. The whole idea is that it's about putting others first. It's about empathy, it's about active listening, it's about awareness, selfless action, and empowering individuals in the team. And we had a good debate, because critics argue that it lacks authority. And although that's true, the whole ethos behind what I think is probably the single most important systems engineering skill is an ability to influence without authority. You need to be humble, you need to work towards win-win solutions and prioritise the greater good over individual self-worth. And it's interesting, Steve yesterday talked about the transition from author to authority, and I wonder if that has actually almost counted against us in a sense, because we have that humbleness, and if you have that systems thinking ability and you've got a knack for trusting others, for being that servant leader, you've got people that are very, very capable of shaping the future of civilization, but possibly not always being recognised as such. So that's one aspect. It's not the only thing that systems technical leaders need. This is the foundation technical leadership model developed by the INCOSE TLI a few years ago. And in simple terms, it just argues that behaviours of successful systems leaders can be summarised by 6 key principles. So holds the vision is the first one. That's the why, and we always start with the why. What's the impelling purpose to motivate people? How do we bring people together to define and integrate the system components to achieve successful outcomes? Think strategically is a response to that why. It's the how. So how do we go about it? What's the high-level plan? How do we deploy holistic thinking to provide strategic direction? Fosters collaboration. This is the awareness of different viewpoints and skills necessary for collective success, and how we integrate that, how we utilise things like creative conflict. Enables others to be successful. Oh, sorry, I've skipped one. I'll come back to that. So demonstrates emotional intelligence is the self-awareness and perception of people's needs in order to inspire, in order to bring out the best and drive towards win-win situations. Enable others to be successful. This is the servant leadership piece, really. It's the framework that lets others develop solutions within an agreed boundary. It's recognising that leadership success derives from the success of the individuals that you are leading, and communicates effectively. So this is the basis for a lot of our socio-technical relationships. Those have, as we know, a very, very strong influence on the success of any engineering product or service. We talk about learning the language of those you seek to influence, and it's so true. That includes cultural and regional appreciation as well. I remember one of our early cohort meetings, someone had verbally tabled an agenda item on the art of storytelling, and I jumped straight in. I started telling my story, and I was cut short for not sticking to the agenda. Turns out in America, to table an agenda item means to take it off the table. Who knew? And I think a lot of other English-speaking countries have the same understanding. So subtleties like that matter, and it's amazing how even though you communicate in what you think is the same language, it's not always the case. We make assumptions. I'll revisit this a little bit later just to overlay some more of the forward-looking considerations that we've added. But first, I just want to explore the understanding of what additional future complexities are resulting in some of the potential leadership gaps, or behaviour gaps, I should say. And I said complexity, but I should have said complexities because it is a plural. These are exploding, as one of the TLI coaches, David Long, explains. The growth and complexity and stakeholder expectations is kind of unparalleled. We're tackling bigger problems, the system scale. We're tackling more audacious problems. We ourselves are injecting technology complexity into smarter systems, into connected systems. This legacy mindset, the mechanistic, mechanical systems view is outdated now. That is relevant for physical systems, which only impact whatever they're physically touching. So if you think of a brick, that only exerts a force on the 6 bricks next to it, on the various faces. But the world we live in now, the electronics, the software, the things that weave their way through the digital systems, they're becoming more prominent, and it's only going to be the same tomorrow. That leads to inherently more complex systems behaviour and kind of digital butterfly effects that we have to manage. Project team complexity is the next one. So this is kind of just recognising that we can no longer gather everyone involved in a major system in one room. There are just too many people. There's a global supply chain. Dynamic complexity. The pace of change is so great in some contexts that the applicable technologies that we're looking at as we try to engineer a solution are changing, and by the time we've converged on a solution, it's out of date. It's no longer the optimal one. And cycle time, the last one. We need to do more in less time. So these systemic changes, moving into the middle part of the century, I suppose, they present a monumental technical leadership challenge. I don't have the answers. We don't have the answers. This group within the TLI, we are not leadership experts by any means, but we've at least tried to attempt to synthesize the viewpoints and ideas of some quite esteemed global stakeholders to future-proof and to evolve the technical leadership model. So I'd like to share how we went about doing that. So the primary goal of our research was to gather perspectives on different leadership approaches and potential inputs to the future leadership model. As I said earlier, we had a globally dispersed team, which was great. That meant we could do interviews with senior leaders from diverse cultures and industries, and we were able to do that using a number of different approaches. So, we had structured interviews, and that was predetermined questions in a set order, and that was good for making like-for-like comparisons between different stakeholders. But we also had some interviews where we focused more on the context and a semi-structured question set, and that enabled a little bit more creative thought, and it's useful to understand some of the ideas that emerged there. But we also had a lot of conversational-based interviews as well. Some of them maybe not pre-arranged or perhaps by chance, but that kind of flexible approach helped to prioritise exploration of thought and more creative dialogue. I always remember one of the interviews I did in Synoptics with the former technical director before he retired. He told me that he works extremely hard at doing nothing at all. I thought, oh God, he's a lazy git. What he meant is that, in his role, if he was doing something, he was depriving someone else of the opportunity to do it, of the opportunity to learn. And in certain instances, you had to get involved. But actually, if you're going to build Square and people are going to learn and develop, and in some cases fail, that's the only way to do it. So he was very laissez-faire, but his approach is valid. So these initial findings, we pulled all of that together. We used it as a basis for a collaborative workshop that was hosted online with various participants and coaches from the wider INCOSE community. And the diversity of experience, of culture, of professional opinion. We had some really constructive dialogue. Come back to it a little bit later, but just to highlight some of the common themes that were beginning to emerge. on this slide here, it became abundantly clear that we being a community of technical leaders and aspiring technical leaders, need to be more flexible. So our capacity to plan 15, 20 years into the future is kind of in the past. You know, the only trend that we know and understand is that situations change quickly, and technical leaders need to be prepared to adapt. Digital advances, you know, data science techniques, all of these things can actually be leveraged. We can see it as an opportunity to strengthen systems engineering leadership skills, and support our ability to identify trends as pivotal data points. Now, going back to the INCOSE vision, you know, Vision 2025 didn't include anything about a generational defining global pandemic. But the occurrence of that, you know, these sorts of events they're not new. You know, there are global disruptive events that hit all of the pestle factors every few years, and they force a leadership mindset that revolves around crisis management. You know, so even in my lifetime, the ones I remember is you know, the 9/11 attacks, the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID pandemic, obviously. And last year, we had the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and a lot of these are labelled sort of black swan type events, and they always come as a shock. They should come as a shock, but the fact that they occur is almost an inevitable certainty. So, not to go on too much about that, but the role of technical leaders needs to be about harnessing an understanding of how we remain flexible, how we adapt to evolving needs, and how we kind of continue that growth of human capital. So moving on to the kind of synthesis of the data, these workshops and interviews were great, a lot of divergent thinking, but we as a team needed to converge on some meaningful inputs that we could actually capture in our model. So at first we tried to distill some of these collective ideas into sort of organisational and individual perspectives. So just starting on the left, we character attributes, that kind of your personal beliefs, values, that has an impact, obviously. There's the management of relationships, so both within and beyond the business context, how do individuals learn to establish new connections, grasping relationship dynamics and the variations of those from person to person. And that's becoming increasingly tricky, as we found with hybrid and remote working. All of this research was done without any of us ever meeting in person. That has to have had some kind of impact. Navigating the technological shifts, so this is kind of recognising that there's an inherent human resistance to change. Leaders face the task of kind of overcoming that and fostering alignment. A lot of it has to link to the organisational vision, directly across from it on this slide. Often that's not communicated convincingly, and that makes it challenging for individuals to buy into the bigger picture. It hinders individual responsiveness to novel approaches. And employee time and job, this is an interesting one. It seems that even though the average employee time and job across the globe is about 4.1 years, that is reducing fast, and the statistic for kind of Generation Z is more like 2 years. There is a huge amount of lost knowledge and investment there. So how do we learn effectively across systems to retain that value, if not necessarily the people themselves? From an organisation perspective, so we've got the fact that there's global competition, there's progressively diverse workforces, which is a good thing, but there's cultural barriers that come with that. We spoke about stakeholder expectations and organisation vision. The hierarchical structure, that's kind of recognising that there's an opportunity to harness decentralised and shared dynamic leadership. Can we empower employees? Can we nurture a level of trust and integrity within teams that actually allows some delegation of decision making? And this is something I want to talk a little bit more about in this slide. So we thought, let's step back a bit and really look at the different leadership approaches that exist. And I think through discussion it emerged that there's actually quite a negative subjective view of static traditional leadership approaches that are associated with resistance. And there's a far more positive, objective view of dynamic leadership approaches around acceptance and transformation. And while there is almost certainly an industry trend from the former to the latter, both leadership behaviours are valid, and they will indeed both still be valid going forward. There's a place for the authoritative decision-making that static leadership brings about, especially when pressure and time constraints kind of force the need for a quick decision. But as the complexity of the systems that we are engineering increases, one person, one decision maker, cannot have the level of technical understanding needed to make every single decision an informed one. So that's why we are seeing more servant-based dynamic leadership behaviours. They're becoming widespread. There's a reliance on collective knowledge. And teams, individuals are stepping up because there's a level of trust there, and that initiative is useful to support better decision outcomes. So it's a balancing act. It's risk versus reward. And actually, I think it was touched on by Michael Jackson this morning when he was talking about control versus ingenuity. It's exactly this. How do we strike the right balance there? There's no right or wrong, really, but it's important we learn from the decisions we make. And from a leadership perspective, we have to hold that long-term vision. We have to keep the end goal in sight, and we have to bring people with us on the journey. And with that, I'm going to present you our contender for the cheesiest slide of the week. A very simple sailboat analogy, but bear with me. So destination and vision. This is recognising that there is a project end goal, there's a vision, there's a vision that leaders have to communicate and get the team to buy into, that has to inspire. There are external forces like wind, which signifies external forces as factors that can hinder progress or accelerate progress. So market dynamics, economic condition, industry trends, effective leaders recognise and adapt to these to keep the team steering in the right direction. There's anchored constraints. So these are obstacles, what's slowing down progress, how do we overcome things like organisational bureaucracy, outdated processes, resistance to change, and keep the team moving forward. Challenges, rocks, how do we navigate around unknown blockers or things that require a swift response from leaders without sinking the team. Our sales, our strengths, how do we recognise and leverage strengths of individuals in the team and empower those individuals to drive towards the end goal. And then how do we adapt the sales actually to adjust, to make sure that we're catching the wind. That flexibility, that adaptability is kind of fundamental if we're going to capitalise on opportunities. And then the rudder, we've labelled it leadership here, but fundamentally this is just about providing the direction, the guidance, the decisions, steering the team towards the end goal. Leadership comes down to about making the right course corrections at the right time. And the last one, collaboration, recognising that fundamentally that every project is a team effort. Different characters, different individuals responsible for different tasks. How do technical leaders foster a culture of cooperation and make sure that we're working together effectively to get to that end goal? And when we do get there, how do we recognise and reward to the fact that there's been a lot of success? We have to consider morale, motivation, and understand that the benefit of celebrating success is very often realised in whatever project follows next. So this portrays quite a trivial picture, but the fallout and the future trends that we identified were fundamental to add further context to our model. So serve to lead, this shared vision, servant leadership, talked about that emerging after the Second World War. And I guess people maybe associate leadership and the Second World War with Winston Churchill, who was no doubt an inspirational wartime leader, but he was voted out of power by the 1945 general election. He'd achieved his vision of winning the war, and yet he wasn't a typical servant-style leader. So that more authoritative leadership that served a specific purpose at a given point in time under specific conditions, and and as successful as that was, it's not necessarily going to be the default position as we move forward. I won't go over all of these. I just want to mention the digital age and data-driven decision-making, because that's one that has become increasingly under focus as we manage globalization and cross-functional teams. I've personally found it quite useful when you can gather those decision makers and agree on inputs, agree on assumptions that you can feed into something like an MBSE enterprise model, because it makes it very hard for them to then dispute the output from that model, and that has to accelerate strategic and political decision making. So just moving on to the last section, we know that the SE landscape is undergoing a shift due to a number of challenges that we've discussed. There is the rising stakeholder expectations, there's the technology advancements, there's the global megatrends, the interdependent world environment. With all of that in mind, we had to evolve the leadership model somewhat to incorporate additional behaviour characteristics. There is a huge amount of synergy and overlap with the previous work, but just to kind of reiterate some of the key takeaways and link back to the original problem considerations, there will be a huge focus on human systems integration going forward. The advancement in digitization and AI, increased connectivity, data science, they're propelling organizations to adopt new technologies and foster a stronger focus on human-machine interactions. So we talk about data being the oxygen of next-gen systems, and that complexity means we need to draw inspiration from elsewhere. And there's a lot of work being done to look at the biosciences, and again, it's something else that was talked about this morning. The organisms, the lifelike representation of some of these systems means that we have to think a bit differently. As leaders, we need to drive the underpinning principles of SE to develop the systems. We must embrace this transdisciplined approach, be outward-looking, be the connective tissue that links the different disciplines and specialists together. And there's a real risk that if we don't do that, if we're too inward-looking, then we go against what SE is about. We run the risk of the discipline, not surviving, because it can't that way. The people aspect, that really matters more than anything else. Overall social well-being, emotional intelligence, empathy, that they become even more critical in a workforce, and there's an increasing duty of care for leaders to be mindful of that, and it all kind of links into this Society 5.0 vision of a human-centered society. And the last one I'll mention on this slide is just the fact that we've got more connected global civilization, which drives a positive focus on diversity and a deeper understanding of cultural awareness. We did a lot of work on behavioural preferences and neurodiversity, actually, which is something that is only really starting to be accommodated in the way that it should be. And leaders, we have a massive opportunity to cultivate that and bring out the best in people. We have to if we're going to meet the challenges of tomorrow. So, done a lot of talking there, but just going back to the purpose of the paper, we explored various trends, the ones that will influence technical leaders and project potential leadership approaches, and what has to be done to change them to meet the future challenges of systems engineering. The fact remains, and I think one of the key conclusions is the people aspect. People will continue to accelerate change because humans will continue to dream bigger dreams. It's just the way we work. We've got Saudi Arabia building a ski resort in the desert last week. Wow. I think sometimes you have to think just because you can doesn't mean you should, but that doesn't apply across the board. Humans are going to keep wanting to do more, and we have to leverage digitalization, AI, machine learning, data analytics, all the things in the INCOSE Vision, if we're going to lead the adaptation of SE with an approach that's fit for purpose, with an approach that embraces those 21st century technologies. So that's the key piece. We need to lead systems engineering towards positive emergence. We need to lead it away from negative, unintended consequences. We need to advocate, we need to innovate and educate to bring together the systems perspective. And it's not going to be easy. I think that's the key message. So thank you. Happy to take any questions. I'll just briefly thank the TLI coaches as well, who've been fundamental and support over the last 2 years. I don't think any of them are here, unfortunately, but yeah, thank you.
So we can take some questions, Derek.
Derek Price, Network Rail Consulting. Thanks for that, Jack. Clearly, your report, a lot of work's been done to create a leadership model. I think a lot of us recognise as being it's a well-accepted one. You said a few interesting things about the danger of being inward-looking. So to what degree was it, say, if you like, an INCOSE internal information, INCOSE leaders interview-based projection of what we think the world wants, and how much has it managed to capture what the world is asking us to do?
Yeah. So the 5 individuals in the team, the vast majority of interviews we did were with industry personnel that are not necessarily connected with INCOSE, actually. So that brought a few different perspectives, but actually a lot of what they said was the same as the perspectives of those that we captured from the workshops, the online sessions we conducted with the TLI and with the wider INCOSE community, so that there was actually a good amount of overlap, to be fair. I think when the INCOSE Vision 2035 came out, there was a little bit of criticism around the fact that how we're looking where INCOSE and generating that. Did we engage with other industry bodies to put it together? I don't know that we did. But having said that, a lot of what was discussed resonated with the industry stakeholders that we spoke with. So I'm trying to think of one clash, but I can't. So it was, there was a good amount of synergy.
Any more questions from the floor?
I really thought some of the controversy there would spark some debate, but this is great.
Hi, Jenny Whitby, Leonardo. I was just wondering if you've got any updates to maybe competency matrices that might result from some of the work you've done on the technical leadership aspect.
Yeah. We ought to have a look at that, definitely. I think there's a kind of accepted development pathway whereby technical leaders only appear mid-career, late career. There's not a huge amount of training or thought that goes into it until you've kind of mastered your discipline, until you've grasped the basics. And I wonder if there's more we can do early on to nurture, to develop leaders from an early age. I don't know. I think it's something I'll feed back to the TLI, because that's an aspect that they think about, and we ought to have an overlay of competence that isn't just what is needed for an engineering chartership or systems engineering certification. So yeah, it's a good point. Thank you.
I think we've got time for another one or two.
Martin Miller, DENS. You talked about leadership, and leadership is fundamentally about getting people to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. So if your focus was on technical leadership for the paper, do you think it should have just been broadened to leadership? Because if we technically know our subject, we've still got to fundamentally get non-technical people to do what we want them to do. So should you focus more on leadership as a whole rather than just technical leadership?
So I'm going to give the stereotypical systems engineering answer and say it depends. I think within the TLI community, there's a huge there's a huge focus on technical leadership being a blend of technical excellence and leadership skills, and the overlap there. I think when you're leading a group of systems engineers, certainly in my experience, I haven't had to lead or manage any systems engineer who doesn't enjoy their job, who doesn't like what they're doing, and actually that makes it a little bit easier to kind of inspire a vision or an end goal, and I think, you know, encourage work that they don't necessarily not want to do, but it's maybe different in other engineering disciplines if there's a genuine resistance to actually doing delivery work. So yes, I guess perhaps there is more that could be looked at. This paper had to define a scope, and it was just the technical leadership aspects, but I think a lot of it applies across the patch to leadership in any industry. You know, it comes down to people, how people are wired and motivated and inspired, and you know that's the case even with outside of engineering. Yeah, so it's a good point. Maybe there's some extra sources that could build on this work that isn't exclusively within INCOSE or the TLI.
We have time for one more, if there's one more on the floor. Yep.
Yeah, perhaps to continue this question. So the elevator pitch of what is technical leadership might well be, I'm using technical means to make the leadership happen. Or it could be you don't use by as the connecting word between technical and leadership. You say it's of. So I'm using leadership means to make the technical work happen. Yeah. So there's, you know, just looking at the dictionary of connecting words, there are possibly 5 or 6 interpretations of the phrase technical leadership. Yeah. And it may be that there's confusion between kind of interpretations of them. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so back to the researcher, what's your pitch on what you think technical leadership is?
Yeah, so I quite like your second description. I think for me, it's leadership of technical work, technical delivery. And quite often in organizations, that's a different role to being a line manager or a project manager or a people leader. But you need to lead people to deliver the technical work. So that's why there's this overlap. That's why it's about technical excellence and leadership skills, because both, you know, have to be in harmony. So yeah, I very much took it as the other authors might have a different view on it. I'll take it away and ask them, but my view was very much about, you know, leading a team of individuals to deliver technical work, and you know, that helped me to focus on what we've been asked to do fundamentally.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Please show your appreciation to Jack.